Awesome. We're live yet again, and we've got this illustration that we're going to keep going with. This is going to be a lot of structural drawing in this session, so let me know if you've got any structural drawing questions or other things that we can talk about. How's everyone doing? Let me know who's around in the chat at the moment, because again, I can't see the chat. I can see it if you talk to me. I can't see if you're just hanging around. Cool. So I'm gonna keep going with these line characters, but I think first what I'll do is just mess around somewhere else that's not as important, because when you're sort of going back into an image, it's vital, I think, to sort of just warm up, you know what I mean? Unless you've been drawing stuff, all day. And I think at some point we need to kind of figure out again where our sort of focus is going to be. This is going to be a big point of focus, so we're really going to work this up, and then our sort of focus is going to be, we'll probably have, is going to be a big point of focus, so we're really going to work this up, and then our sort of focus is going to be, we'll probably have, is going to be a big point of focus, so we're really going to work this up, and then our sort of focus is going to be, we'll probably have, is going to be a big point of focus, so we're really going to work. Let me know when you have that mic sorted out, because I think the mic is feeding back. All right, so in that endeavor of, again, just sort of starting somewhere else and then figuring things out, I'm just going to play around with these areas here. This character and these set of characters are going to be the main focal area, and there'll probably be a few areas here that are what I'd sort of call like secondary areas of detail, and it's going to be important to kind of work those up. But yeah, it's also important to just kind of move through this and get to a point where most of the effort that we're going to put in is going to be in that sort of final stage, because we can always make up detail on the fly. So the first job here is to just redefine where a lot of those sort of rocks and other forms here actually are. There were kind of sketchy versions of that. Let's make a new version of this and put it on a monitor up there so I can check it out. Yeah, so there are different versions of, there is like a pre-existing kind of rough version of this, but what I want to do is just really go through and construct that out and figure out exactly where all of these different planes are going. So I'm going to sort of trace forms across those planes, and as I do that, I'm going to sort of think about where I want to put some of those markings for the rock, right, to sort of indicate the dimensionality of the rock. Keeping in mind that the most likely way we're going to be able to sort of tell the story of the rock texture is in the silhouette. So again, that's our best sort of opportunity. So again, thinking about where that silhouette will be and how we can create little micro compositions with little bits of other rock, etc., that has kind of fallen down. And again, just pushing overlapping forms, overlapping shapes. What I'll do is I'll center it a little bit more so that we can see that a bit better. You can kind of see how it relates to everything. Now, I'm not going to bother putting these things on separate layers anymore because I figured out where everything's going to be. So all we need to do now is just draw out what is going to be on the page. And just go through and define all of those little areas a bit better. So this is a tricky bit of the process because you can't really take your foot off the gas yet. You need to still focus, but we're kind of redoing what we have done in the past. Now, if this was a rougher illustration or something that didn't require quite the level of sort of detail, it certainly is possible to just kind of go through and, create this stuff from scratch, and maybe kind of make up some of these lines as we go. But what I want to do here is, just sort of make sure that I'm not going to have to do too much erasing there. But again, I don't have to create crazy amounts of detail. I just have to push and refine some of these shapes. So this is where we can think about some of that detail. Start Camtasia recording. So here we can get that detail going. And this is a good opportunity if you haven't done a lot of this work before to just test how much detail do I need to put in. So this is where if we just did this blindly, if we just jump in, it can be very easy to accidentally be zoomed up over here and spend a lot of time and effort on something that is just going to end up being too detailed. So thinking about some leaves or other shapes that we're going to use to create interesting silhouettes. Let's vary the angle that those are sort of drawn at. And again, I'm going to try and speed up because I noticed, again, I'm being a little bit careful with some of these, and I'm not sure whether that's really kind of helping me to do the job that I need to do. And that doesn't really matter if you're just practicing, but I'm kind of on a bit of a time schedule with this. We've got to really figure out what we're doing. So again, get some ellipses going. It's not quite right. What we could do here is create some create a simple version of this with the technical drawing tools of Photoshop, which again, I wouldn't normally do, but we can just sort of demonstrate that idea. Right. So if we want to make sure that the ellipse here is sort of symmetrical, can create the drawing of that. I guess, I don't know what it would be. It's sort of like a pillar vase thing. And then again, I'm just going to do this really cheaply by reusing that ellipse there. Probably a better thing to do would be to recreate that ellipse, but I think we'll be okay by just doing something really simple like this. So you can see there, again, I've got the major elements that I need to create that in a pretty solid way. All right, so let's sort of erase that back. And, you know, I don't really need anything more. I don't need to make that fancier or, you know, even draw anything else. That's kind of telling me what I need to draw. So again, put that over there. Now, yeah, they should be at equal heights, but it's interesting that, again, some of this extra information is at a different sort of height. So I'm just going to merge that back down. Yeah. Cool. Let's get that. Control J. Let's see if we move that over. Now I did this before, but yeah, not entirely convinced it's working in the same way, right? Not entirely convinced it's at that same height. So hopefully that will work. Now, one of the things, so I'm just going to merge this down. Now you could be smarter about it, right? And leave all of these things on separate layers. But if we just merge them all down, I think that'll make life a lot easier. So one of the things I was noticing before is that, you know, I think I just had too much stuff up here. So I'm going to keep this a little bit simpler. And I'm going to exaggerate that there's kind of almost like a little roof or tiled top here. So again, we need to exaggerate that dimensional, the dimensional nature of it. Otherwise, it might feel like it's just kind of awkwardly drawn. Boom. All right. So again, I feel like that's sort of having a bit more, right? A bit more structure and interest to it. And again, what we'll be doing is joining that up. And that will sort of give us the feeling that we need. Again, all of these things will kind of have some cracks and things on them that will help us sort of show the dimensionality. Again, that needs to go. That probably does need to go around there. And there'll also be some other sort of crawling vines and things, right? Maybe a bit of grass growing here and there. And again, all of these things are just opportunities to play with the shape design, give us some contrast, give us some texture so that it doesn't feel too static. Pretty basic stuff. So in many cases, it's just a matter of repeating the same ideas. If we, you know, you can have illustrations that have a real sense of botany to them, where they really are describing a large variety of plants and things. This is not going to be one of those illustrations. But we've got like a couple of tools. We sort of got grass tool, right? Which is just a squiggle like that repeated. And obviously we can basically modify the shape. We've got this kind of creeper vibe, which is basically just, it's circles repeated. And we also will be able to sort of do some sort of simple plants, which will be similar to these, maybe with a leaf structure a bit more like this. But these ones will be based on, again, having sort of some branch structure. So there's really only 3 ideas there. And the sort of creeper thing, again, will allow me to sort of create shapes within this kind of mini composition, right? So if we think about there being stuff here, and there needs to be like a little bit of flow or sort of something going on there to kind of just make this interesting. And it's the placement of these little, basically circles that will direct the eye, right? So we're sort of being directed by placement of those. The little grass thingies, they're there to help us soften transitions. So when we have sort of one object versus another object, you often do get sort of grass growing there. It's unlikely for it to get sort of trampled. And what this does is, again, gives us an interesting silhouette and helps us manage the transition and overlap between sort of one plane or one object and another object. So that's really what that's there for. And also to help us tell the depth story, right? So as we place these things here, it helps us to describe what's happening with the depth. And also we can, as you can kind of see here, we'll be using those to help us create interesting little silhouettes to define sort of one pattern area from a different pattern area. And the sort of tree-like structures are there so that we can get sort of interesting overlap and create interesting overlap where we have like foreground object that can kind of reach up and cross multiple other sort of parallax depth zones. And again, that will sort of help us with depth. So they're different tools and they do different things. And they're primarily there to help us, again, make things interesting, tell the story of, I guess, the sort of overgrown back to the earth sort of feel that an abandoned city would have, but also to help us just tell the general depth story and create little interesting micro compositions. One of the things that is very challenging to render is just a flat plane of grass with no interest in it. So if it's just a flat plane of grass, there's no interest, there's no sense of like forms overlapping forms. And that's why, you really do want to kind of put stuff around, or at least, again, have sort of areas of light, so you have light, dark, light. And again, that allows you to kind of tell the story of the silhouettes as they cross each other. Just having a giant flat bit of grass is, it seems like, oh, that's going to be really easy. Just crank out the grass brush and away you go. Whereas in fact, it's very, very challenging because it looks boring. And if something looks boring, again, you're going to have to paint it really well. If the composition and the basic sort of picture making depth stuff works, often you can paint it poorly and it'll still be interesting. All right. So just going through, doing what I said I'm doing, making some sense of this foreground. There's a lot of different elements in there. It seems like, oh man, that's a lot of boring sort of rendering and stuff. The reality is, once it's all kind of said and done, there's not going to be a lot of rendering in this image. It's going to primarily be flat color. And so this really is where I get an opportunity to put something in and actually, you know, make a difference. If we do it here and it kind of works, then the rest of it will be kind of easy. If I get lazy here, then I'll probably be left with a whole bunch of open space, or, you know, an area where I just can't do anything. And the flat color isn't going to help me, right? Obviously, that there's no way back. So most of the hard work is done at this stage here. And again, if we get the overlaps right and the shape's interesting and we sort of figure them out at this sketchy phase, then, you know, even it's the same goes for the line work, right? The line work can be not excellent, can be, you know, a little bit amateurish, but if we get the basic concepts right, you know, the picture will read and we'll be looking at the right things, and no one will really notice that your line work isn't great, or you know, the draftspersonship is not up to scratch. So again, here I've just got sort of grass, right? So again, it's not a matter of just grass brush everywhere. I think that can be a trap for the young player, is sort of just thinking, well, I can just sort of put it everywhere. Whereas what we're often actually trying to do is create sort of little, again, micro compositions and patterns and areas of interest to help show the depth and show, like, oh, here's like a tightly, you know, clumped bit of grass, right? You know, maybe there's a few sort of different unique little bits and pieces over here, right? Over here, it's going to be a little bit more empty and open. And yeah, putting in all these different sort of pattern areas and things, this is definitely something that you know, we want to kind of play around with, and then we'll, you know, draw everything else up and take a read on it and sort of see, look, does this seem like this is going in a good direction? Does it seem too busy? How does that look? With a line and color style, there's no way to really know that without practice. You have to practice and understand how these kind of, you know, sketchy line sort of versions of things are going to work, right? You have to have a bit of that foresight that comes with experience to know, like, is this sketchy version of it going to look good once we sort of color it? But again, you build a sense for that as you progress. So here again, got some interesting sort of weird little plants. So it's where, again, I'm just gonna, you know, do this sketchy version of this, very rough. We don't need to go crazy with it here. But I am just indicating, like, pattern, where things go, where things don't go. And we'll be able to gauge a little bit more about whether that's working before we go to the final. So again, still being pretty loose. I guess that's sort of part of what I'm saying. It's like, yeah, we're still being kind of loose and rough, even though it's a structural. Some of it's structural. So that the stuff that hasn't been constructed, like the characters, that's important to, you know, really understand and sort of nut it out, because, you know, if that's not there, then it's not going to work. Some of the stuff is, I guess, less structural and more about making sure the pattern and the overlap and the depth is sorted. And obviously these things will be on sort of different layers, and I'll, you know, figure that out as we come to it. But for now, they're all on the same layer. Now I kind of worked this one up a bit more, so I need to do that same thing there. Again, these elements will really anchor the image quite a bit, so I think it will become important to give them a bit of attention. When you're figuring out how much detail to put in somewhere, a lot of it is just about figuring out where the primary read is going to be, right? Where are people actually going to look? First, where do we want them to look? And then basically don't worry about the rest of it. And yeah, I think these will kind of anchor the image, right, from one side to another. So they'll kind of stop the eye slipping off, right? We'll give them something to look at, and then again, sort of lead the eye back. Same way here, right? This will sort of be something to look at, but will then sort of lead the eye towards the center of the image. And yeah, so that means probably most of this stuff here will be fairly low contrast, and yeah, we'll focus mostly on this stuff in the background. So yeah, again, here we just want to kind of have some idea of where things are going to go. So again, I had some kind of overlapping branch-ish plant here. And the primary goal is just to kind of place all these different bits and pieces, and again, just kind of make sure there's a pleasing sense of design to it. So this is purely just two-dimensional design, just making sure that everything is, you know, just looking good from a two-dimensional perspective. Again, it doesn't have to be, I'm not, you know, making sure it's got pretty lines. I'm just making sure, right, the flow of it is sort of feels like a plant, and again has something sort of interesting going on. All right, so again, that'll be an interesting overlap. We can maybe have another sort of one here, and then again another one sort of here. Again, that might be too many. We'll see. We'll see how it sort of goes. Let's help define this structure a bit. And again, we're going to have that same idea on here. And yeah, being super rough with this, right? Like the lines here are not good, but there's something about, I guess, having a particular sort of feeling to some of this foliage stuff where it's almost better if you can introduce some randomness to it. If it's all the same, it's kind of no good, right? If it's too uniform, and sometimes again, it's kind of like if we're a little bit more sort of abstract in the way we approach that, the rough sketch, which again isn't about stroke. It's not about sort of going through there and being like, oh, here we got one leaf, oh, here we got another leaf. Again, that is a good way to do it. But I feel like what will happen there is we get something that's very sort of static. So this is something that we can do. We can pick out from this sort of chaos some of those sort of cleaner shapes in the final, versus now I just want to sort of, again, get an interesting sort of variety going. And again, there'll be some sort of foliage around the place. In a similar way to some of these rocks and things, if we spend too much time, thinking about exactly where all the structure goes, they're not going to feel organic enough or sort of worn enough. So again, part of what we do at this phase is to design the, some of those silhouettes and break that stuff up a bit. Obviously, that only works if the initial sort of block-in is working. So again, sometimes I'll be doing this, sometimes I'll be worrying about other stuff, like making sure it's actually square. But this stuff looks pretty square, so the next thing to do is to worry about making it look a little bit sort of rougher. And again, just as I was saying before, prototyping what that will look like. Like maybe there'll be a bit too much detail somewhere. Right. So again, I want to sort of keep detail a bit away from there. Keep detail away. It's all about balance, right? Just like constantly going through everything and balancing everything. So too much here, not enough there, etc., etc. So you can see, again, we sort of zoom out, we're starting to see, a bit of that, right, of what will be there. Now I feel like this, right, like this rock here is just very similar to this one. So it's going to try and make that a bit different. All right. So again, there'll be some sort of foliage on the back here. Where does that start? Yeah, like about there. Okay, so yeah, again, you can see the basic process is the same. The more time you've got, the more you can fuss around with this, you know, make sure it's all perfect. And yeah, I kind of want this to sort of, some of these things to kind of blend in. All right, so they're going to sort of blend into the ground a bit. So it doesn't feel quite so static. Because again, stuff that's really sort of old and overgrown, it's kind of like you can't tell where one thing starts and another thing ends. It's very kind of, it's very sort of overgrown. All right. Just need to define that silhouette a bit. So I'm sort of fiddling around here, but I'm looking up at the screen, sort of above there. That's kind of what I'm doing. All right, so let's do, while my brain is sort of good at, you know, figuring that sort of thing out, we'll do a bit more sort of down here. Probably, again, same thing there. Maybe that's a bit much. All right. So let's make sure these match. Yeah. So you can see, again, for the most part, that's kind of lining up. And that one's going to be there, coming out here. Right, that one's going to be there, coming out there. There we go. So again, just making sure again, as I said previously, making sure that the block itself is kind of right. And once we've done that, we can, be a lot looser with everything. It's going to be less critical. Cool. I think Mr. X, aka Dan, is saying in the chat, yeah, finding the confidence in the sketches is kind of tricky. And I feel like people talk a lot about confidence in sort of drawing, right? And I feel like that is something that people often sort of talk about, right? Like we're after that sort of like confidence. And a big part of confidence is me knowing, even though this looks not the best, I'm sort of building and putting down scaffolding that I'm going to sort of build up later. And I think that's often where you kind of have that mix between, look, it doesn't look good, but it kind of has, again, that sort of sense of purpose to it. I think that's often when we look at art that we really kind of like, that's a bit sketchy and it kind of feels like it has purpose, right? It's not sort of labored. So yeah, I think in many cases, the confidence in your sort of sketching will come from knowing that you kind of know where you're going to go with it. Whereas when I was beginning, if I was to kind of, do this kind of thing here and just kind of leave that rough, I probably would freak out about it a bit more, right? I'd kind of be like, oh, is that going to turn out? Whereas, again, the more experience you get, the more confident you get knowing what you need at a particular stage, as opposed to kind of having to do more than you need just to kind of convince yourself that it's going to be okay, which again tends to lead to sort of tighter drawings that don't feel as confident and also just takes a lot longer. And I think when things take a bit longer, that also sort of takes some of the energy from you, right? Because you're repeating steps. So when you're repeating steps, again, there's not the same energy to it. And again, it just takes a lot of experience to do all those things. I think I did one image. Where is it? Let's see if I can find it. That had a similar sort of vibe, right? Just searching for it. And when I did that, actually, I wonder whether I've got the PSD of it. That'll take longer to load, but probably be a bit better. Just looking through files. Yeah, so when I did this image, again, it's a similar sort of idea. And that's kind of what we sort of ended up with. It was too much noise, right? There's too much sort of busyness in the lines, I felt. So one of the things that I'm, again, making sure I don't do on Oh, it's going to show a bunch of stuff that shouldn't be shown. Yeah, so when I do like these, I'm really conscious to be like, let's leave some open areas, let's leave some space there, so that it doesn't look sort of too crowded. Yeah, I think again, Mr. X, aka Dan, in the chat is sort of saying, do I have any tips for sort of relaxing with it? Well, it's always tricky because you don't want to relax too much, because I have done that as well, and then it's turned out rubbish. So it's a matter of getting it right. I think the trick is to understand, as I said, to me, a lot of it is really learning the pen grip, right? Like the attitude you sort of have to it. So again, like, how are you building it? Like, what are you doing? And I think that's the number one key, is to sort of say, if you think about your process, right? Again, like, we're going from here to here, and then we're going from here to here. And the real trick is to figure out, like, what are we doing at this stage and what are we not doing? So I think relaxation comes when we're less overwhelmed and we're less worried about multiple things. So for instance, here, when I'm sort of just messing around, I'm hyper focused on making sure, again, it's not too busy, that I'm not sort of creating weird shapes. That I want to kind of make sure that this frames the characters. So it's thinking about design. Things that I'm not worried about are the finish of the line, and I'm also not worried about structure, right? Because I know that I can kind of overlay structure on this a little bit later on, but there's no point in kind of adding structure to it if the blob of grass or moss is in the wrong spot, if that makes sense. So it's a matter of saying, like, what am I doing and what am I not doing? Whereas if I sort of am thinking, well, this doesn't make sense, how am I going to make sense of it? Then I'm going to start being like, well, I've got one thing overlapping another thing, right? One thing overlapping another thing. And again, that will kind of work, but when we sort of zoom out, that's not effective. So in most cases, it's just a matter of understanding, like, what are we not doing? What are we not worrying about at this stage? And I think that's where, again, when you're sort of, that's what allows you to be more flowy, right? When you're sort of doing your sketchy sort of sketches and stuff. If you know, oh, all I'm doing here is finding the feeling of the figure or whatever, then you can really just focus on the feeling of the figure. If you're worrying about structure as you do gesture, obviously you need to do that to a certain degree, but if you can kind of focus primarily on one thing, I think that's where you sort of get the most results. And I think that's where, again, a lot of the time when you see professional artists work, there's a functionality to it, if that makes sense. Like, that you see it and it's like, it might not be the prettiest sketch, but you can sort of tell that it's very efficient, and there's something sort of appealing in that. I think it's like a function over form sort of approach, right? It looks like it's functional, and therefore it kind of has a certain amount of appeal. Yeah, and I think that there was way too much foliage on that previous piece. That's way too much. I think that was me being like, I normally don't put on enough. So I was kind of like just playing around, and yeah, it was kind of it ended up like it sort of turned out all right, but basically I had to end up, I just did a lot of fighting it. I'd be like, oh, there's too much stuff here, let's tone it down. Yeah. All right, so again, you can kind of see, like, the basics are kind of there, right? And again, I'll reassess those bits and pieces later on. As we go here, I've got, so again, big question would be, do we kind of want to put some of this stuff behind that tiger tail, lion tail? Because that was like an initial overlap. But again, it's like, does it make sense? That's the question. But yeah, I think it does. I think it makes sense to have it there because that gives us more depth overlap, right? It really sort of says this thing is in front of this, which is in front of this, right? So we've got 1, 2, 3 levels of overlap. And I think that sort of tells us the depth story is there, which I think is important. All right, so one of the other things I had was kind of some sort of pattern on this. Again, probably to me, like an easy way of doing that is to think a little bit more about making some sort of patterny thing. Right. Yeah, there's a lot of Russian spam, but I wonder what they're saying or why they bother. All right, so put that sort of thing there. It needs to be a bit sort of smaller. And that way we can easily sort of transfer that over. All right. Put the same thing over here. And again, hopefully that'll be at least something. Yeah, no, it's interesting. We haven't figured out how to beat spam yet. I would have thought that would be pretty obvious. Yeah, so again, just doing the bare minimum of sort of world building, I guess. I don't do enough of this stuff really, right? Like adding interest. But again, those are the main sort of focal areas that we're going to see there. Let's turn that off. Go E. Let's merge that down. Yeah, Diffracted says you need some mods to get rid of the bots. I thought we were in the world of deep learning and AI though. I thought Mark Zuckerberg had all of this sorted. I thought we had quantum computing and all this other nonsense. You can't get rid of a bot that's obviously not saying anything. I don't know, it seems fishy to me. Maybe all that stuff doesn't work after all. I thought we had machine learning everywhere. I thought everything was machine learning. Every Silicon Valley slide deck is machine learning. Hasn't thought Facebook and Twitch would just be one giant machine learning how to get rid of bots and nonsense all the time. Guess that's why they keep still advertising stuff to us after we buy it from the same ad. It's the same guys making the same software. They say it's machine learning. They say it's intelligent. Yeah, I've been on the internet for quite a while, and yeah, the same nonsense keeps happening. Yeah, they make money somehow. What are they? How are they making money from? Just, yeah. Oh well, God bless them, right? That's everyone's got a right to make money and pursue happiness, even bots. Yeah, no, I think it's just stuff you have to put in your slide deck to get money from VCs in Silicon Valley now. I'm not sure there's much machine learning going on. I think they're definitely making us dumber so that we just click on more dumb stuff, and that solves the problem. If you can't make the computer smart, but you can make the people dumb, then it's like, well, the machines won't have to learn as much. Do you mean the older generations as in older like me, or like younger generations as in people who are younger? Or the people who get scammed out of their money by all of the fancy AI schemes? All right. So I think we're kind of like we're pretty ready to like sort of get stuck into this. Again, we could do this, but I feel like I want to sort of set the detail here. Sorry, set the detail kind of here a little bit, and then use that to kind of set that background. Yeah, right. The older people trying to figure out what all of this stuff is. Yeah. Yeah, well, it's probably easier to just ignore it, I think. Just go back to the real world. Although this is pretty cool. I mean, we can stream and, you know, doesn't crash and stuff that much. All right. A few more things back here. Again, just framing. What color scheme? I don't know. I mean, I would normally go through. So yeah, Mr. X, aka Dan, said what color scheme. So yeah, it'll probably be green because there's a lot of grass. So it'll be green plus the line will be sort of warm. And I think the background will obviously have to be pretty cool so that it doesn't sort of interfere. So probably like green plus greeny blue plus red, which is again a typical sort of old color scheme that I use. So yeah, again, Dan's saying what is anyone actually going to go in to, because I'm assuming you're talking about going into classes this year. I don't know. I guess it's a wait and see what happens, right? See what actually happens when it actually starts. I'll probably be tuning in from home because that seems easier for the moment. Oh yeah, so diffracted. So probably there's this is going out streaming to different platforms. So I can see the chat from, I think diffracted, you're on Twitch, and I think some of the other people are tuning in via Facebook. So yeah, I'll make sure I read out comments so that we can actually sort of be in the same chat. Yeah, so again, we're just talking about like whether or not classes are going to go back at CDW in person this this coming year. Yeah, I have no idea. So let's get the reference for that. Let's get some character reference. Where did that go? I had that open. There was that one. Where did the other one go? There we go. Oh, that's a here we go. That one's better res. Yeah. So again, just looking at the costumes and those sorts of things, seeing if I can just remember what I was doing there. Yeah, cool. So Watermelon was saying, how long did it take you to just get the general sketch done? I think the first general sketch took a while. We probably only did like an hour and a half the first session, and I think most of the sketch was completed at that point. If we go back to see if we can get it up. Just loading it up in Photoshop now. So yeah, this was the first sketch, and we sort of got this done on the first day. So probably that was like an hour and a half of me kind of bumbling my way through it. And then what did we do? Then I kind of realized that we needed to change the composition a bit, and that actually took quite a while. So the next kind of stage that I'm just loading up now is kind of this one, and that's where we sort of did another pass and basically just adjusted everything. And I think that probably took us about halfway through the last session, and then I started work on the lion. So I probably did like all of the lion in the extra sort of the second half of last session. So probably like the first sketch was, I'd say it would be like a 2 hour or 2.5 hour sort of thing to get the initial idea down. But again, I'd probably do it a little bit quicker if I was just doing it by myself and not kind of talking through stuff. So yeah, this is kind of the piece that the characters are kind of based on. Because again, there's sort of characters I've drawn before for different things. This was done quite a while ago. I think this is sort of a 2012 image. You can see it's got like painted background, which I don't do that kind of style that much anymore. But yeah, so that's kind of the idea. Again, it's a similar image. It's actually the thumbnail for this one. For this one is based on a thumbnail that we did. Let's see if I can get those up. Yeah, so as part of one of the tutorials that I did, again, quite a while ago, I think it's actually part of the drawing scenes in line and color course that I sort of sell on my site. And it was for a CG Society course, which I think is now like CGMA. So it was for an online course on sort of comic book style illustration. And as part of that, I did this sort of set of thumbnails. And I think we sort of picked like this one as the one to move forward with. And again, there was like a bunch of other ones that didn't quite get done. I think some of them are really cool. Like I want to do that one at some point. There's a bunch of different ones, but this one here is sort of what I'm basing it off. So the concept there is that, there's probably like this idea and this idea have a lot of similarity, right? Where it's kind of, we're looking at the characters from behind and we're kind of following them on a journey, right? Where you can kind of see multiple things. And again, I sort of ended up doing this one mostly because this wasn't a very refined thumbnail. It didn't really have a lot of, I could tell this one had a better sort of, 1, right? Like 2, 3 read. It was going to be a lot, like this is a lot more finished. Whereas this thought was kind of like it's an initial thought and it didn't get resolved. And I sort of moved on and sort of changed stuff. So this, but I felt like this idea was something that was worth sort of pursuing. So that's kind of where we are. But obviously it's changed quite a bit. And a big part of the impetus for the change is that we're going to try and sort of print it really large as a mural on a wall, maybe, depending how it turns out. So it's quite high res, and that means I've sort of made a lot of stuff small. So it's a lot of sort of detail and hyper detail, but you've got to understand that, this will all be huge. So it'll still feel like, there's not much detail in there. So the initial one there, how long that took, I think it was like 12 hours or something. That was like the final record time on the tutorial, was kind of like all up in real time. I think it was kind of like 12 hours for the whole thing. And I think the thumbnails were maybe like, it was a 2-hour session of me just sitting down and being like, blah, 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 let's just sketch out some things and sketch and try and come up with different ideas. You can see that the thumbnail I actually kind of thought I was going to do is not what I actually ended up doing. So I kind of rendered this one up and I was like, that's not really working. So yeah, it's again, it's kind of like a process, but that's why it looks similar to that one. This has got a little bit more detail. Cool. So again, Lewis says hi. How's it going, Lewis? All right, let's jump in here and see whether we can clean some of this stuff up. So again, we sort of left off here last week, and yeah, I didn't want to jump into this straight away because I need to kind of warm up and figure out what else is going on. So yeah, these girls are meant to be like sort of a lot younger, maybe. I'm not sure. So I'm just playing around with that, right? Like seeing how, right? Like how young they kind of look. And again, we've sort of got the hips. Right? We think about proportion. I'm just going through and desperately checking proportion, making sure that they're going to fit where they need to fit. So yeah, I feel like this one's too big. So just gonna see if I can, yeah, just squish it up a little bit. So we've got like one head, right, two, that. Yeah, so that's kind of where the hips need to be, but that's kind of like way down here. So this is the kind of, yeah, this is sort of nonsense problem that you sort of end up with. When you're just kind of like sketching around and being a little bit lazy. So if she's kind of sitting on the lion, right, she needs to be kind of up about here. But again, as you can see, that sort of makes her a bit bigger. So just sort of squeeze that down. Maybe we could kind of make the head a bit bigger relative to everything else. So this is really going to end up with like a hacked up kind of image. But that's okay because again, it's rough and it's good to be able to sort of do that, right? To not worry about it too much. Right, so again, you can see that that feels more plausible to me anyway. I think this even needs to be a little bit lower. And yeah, the last thing that we did last time was that, yeah, I was kind of like playing around with that. So that can always be tricky because I kind of was noticing like, oh, the proportions aren't really good, but you know, we sort of run out of time. So now let's bail and we'll try again. It's easy to just forget that and just kind of just come back and be like, oh, what was I doing? Oh, I don't know. This is all fine. And then, yeah, you kind of think you've sort of done it, but actually you haven't. Cool. So Dan says, love the thumbnails. Cool, thanks. Yeah, I feel like there was some good ideas there. There was something good about that session. I need to do more of those, just sitting down and coming up with thumbnail ideas. The goal there was it's sort of part of that tutorial is don't worry about the time you spend, but do like 20 thumbnails. So whatever you kind of, whatever you do, just do 20. And again, that's quite a challenge. It often ends up with, after about 5 or 10, you kind of get really sick of it. But then we often come up with interesting ideas. So it's sort of worth it. All right, so again, just playing around with creating overlapping shapes. So thinking about what would be there. Again, what's going to be there. We got the character is on this kind of like weird saddle thing. Yeah, that's probably like a little bit elaborate. That's okay. And what else have we got? we can have sort of saddlebags, right? Or kind of provision sacks, right? Just sort of stuff that's kind of strapped there. You think about the way I always think about these things is kind of we're going, you're going in the car or something, and you just kind of end up bringing junk with you, right? So, it might seem like, oh, that's like a lot of stuff, but you would need like water and food. You really would need like, cooking utensils, clothes. So there's a lot of opportunity to kind of be like, well, okay, what are all the things that could be there? Now, the second job is to kind of arrange them in a way that's kind of just somewhat interesting, right? So just using that. If you imagine your set dressing, the best way to think about it is like, if you imagine on the floor, there's like a pile of like all the junk you need to bring, like water bottles and camping gear, etc., because they're kind of, maybe they're sort of journeying somewhere. And then it's like, well, let's just put it on here in an interesting way. Now, obviously, if you're designing the character or the thing, then that's a bit more problematic, because you kind of fix yourself to like, no, this thing goes here and that thing goes there. But again, part of that design is making sure the way things are placed is going to give you some interesting overlap. But yeah, that's kind of like how I think about it, and sort of use those things just to help show that overlap. So again, Lewis is saying, are the characters sort of 15 or 17? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that the main character, it's meant to be sort of more like a like fun, sort of younger adventure thing. So I thought maybe, again, the guy is like, yeah, sort of 15 or 17, and the girls are like, I don't know, again, in that sort of, 14, 15, 16 range. But I think in some of the versions I did, they were like even younger, more like sort of 7 or 8 or whatever. But I think in that previous illustration, they looked a bit older. All right, so again, just managing the size of the heads versus the anatomy. Figuring out the major form of the hair. What's going to be happening? Does that ear overlap or not? Again, that feels a bit big. One of these days I'll figure out how to draw hair. I feel like it's always one of those things that I've never really put a huge amount of effort into. So again, just trying to think about how much sort of structure there's going to be. To those faces. So yeah, doing lots of sort of zooming in, zooming out. I do have this on another monitor, but I'm still just going into the zone of making sure it's all kind of working. So I think in the end, no overlap with the ear. I think we do need to make this arm a little bit chunkier. And again, the idea is it's kind of grabbing this rope, right? That's kind of strung between them. So there's a kind of net of ropes underneath. And again, we'll have our sort of typical overlap, right? So we'll have some overlapping shapes, some of those sort of saddlebag things lying off the side. And again, the only reason I'm doing this is just because overlapping shapes help show depth. It's going to make us feel as if there's sort of complexity there, and it actually makes things quite a bit easier to draw if we've sort of got some good overlaps. We'll have like a lot of opportunity to add interesting sort of patterns there, etc., etc. So I'm going to think about, again, adding some kind of padding or something underneath. And this is all just based on, I remember we did some reference sort of gathering for the initial one, and I remember sort of how those camel saddles kind of worked and stuff like that. They have some sort of padding here and there. Again, these saddles normally have like a saddle blanket or something. Yeah, the lion could be a lot older. I had a range of stories for the characters to kind of figure it out, you know, exactly what it was going to be about, but none of them really ever went anywhere. I think we pitched one, but it was very vague, like ages ago. But I think that was like through like trying to get like an Australian government grant thing. I think some people were like, you should do this, and they were kind of trying to help me do it through an Australian publisher. That didn't go anywhere. And yeah, I've kind of never been a fan of trying to do that stuff, of get the government support. Normally comes with strings attached. Now, where did this go? So I'm just going to drag this back over here, see if I can get some costume reference for the main character. It's interesting to see the type of costumes that I was designing 10 years ago. They're sort of different to what I would do now, which is, yeah, sometimes again I always look back at that and I'm like, well, that was a cool idea. Why don't I do that anymore? That worked. Why did we stop? So again, he kind of has like a lot of fancy armor. Yeah, cool. Let's just check center on these. These faces are like super small, right? But yeah, if we don't get center right, they don't work. And that just means, again, drawing a line down the center and just making sure, we're not sort of cutting off the face or doing anything kind of silly like that. See what his eye is going to look like. Again, it won't be, I'm not fully trying to figure out the exact expression, just figuring out placement. So typically, if I'm sort of, constructing those eyes, again, they're going to look like a little bit funny because there's sort of construction marks there. And the other thing is, I'd always want to leave it until we've actually got the right size of line to kind of make final decisions. So again, this is like quite a chunky line. Something I was saying last week is that you want to kind of, or what I do is I work backwards and say, what is the finished line size I'm going to use? And then I kind of make sure that the sketch that I do is a little bit bigger. So in that case, again, some of these subtle expression things just don't translate, right? They just won't translate well if I kind of, fully refine them and then just ink over it, because the finished one will be different. It'll have a smaller lines. But we do want to kind of figure out all of these overlaps and things, right? So what hair is overlapping what? Figure out all these tangents. Again, they don't have to be figured out in high fidelity. We just, need to make sure we understand what is overlapping what and where all of these shapes will end. So again, for instance, this hair will be quite a challenge to ink if we don't add more to it. Because it's just not sort of refined. Now, again, if you're very comfortable, if you've already drawn the characters a lot of times and you understand how those things are going to function, then you can for sure get away with it. But I don't have that sorted. So just going for like, again, pretty sort of wavy shapes. Let's see if we can just make that a bit shorter. Yeah, so again, I feel like, for the most part, this is going to be good enough. Boom. And again, we've got this thing in front. Let's make sure there's like something here. Maybe not. Maybe we need to tell the story of what's happening under there. What I was going to do is kind of have something, again, that kind of maybe goes right under here. I don't know whether it needs to go all the way though. Maybe it could be a bit further back. Again, maybe we could kind of put some ropes to think about where that's kind of coming. Again, just all I'm thinking is, let's show some overlapping shapes and things, right? So if we can kind of describe the depth a little bit more, it's always going to help. And again, what I'm doing here is just kind of saying this stuff is in front of the tail, and like over here, it's behind the tail. And what that says is, well, that means the tail must be right directly under there. And that gives an instant sort of, it instantly locates the thing that we're drawing. Again, it's why I keep saying that sort of word, and I think it is important, right? We're sort of telling the story of the depth and the space, and we do that by these little tricks of just sort of drawing, different things. And that's why, again, if you think about it as a set, right, you can have all the same things on a table or whatever. But if you arrange them in the right way, you're going to get a lot better sense of depth or composition or interest, just because of the way that works. So it's just arranging things in an interesting manner, right? So again, not sure how. Again, I might look at some extra line reference. See if I can kind of figure out what exactly is going to be there. And again, do a similar thing here with these legs. Because yeah, I'm not 100% sure that what I'm drawing now makes any anatomical sense. So yeah, I'll probably leave that for the moment. All right, so I've got this kind of saddle thing there. And again, more stuff kind of hanging down. So yeah, it's just like this side of it is pretty tedious, right? We're just going through and adding a huge amount of detail. I don't know whether people in the chat kind of can relate to that, but yeah, I feel like one of the hardest things that I had to figure out early on was kind of like how to do this, because my brain does not have an automatic sort of sense of detail, right? I tend to just be like, surely that's enough. And I think it's the way I sort of get away with it, and sort of figure out how to sort of have the right amount of interest, I guess, is to think about the story side of it. Like I was saying, I kind of imagine, what do they need to have there, right? Like, what are all the things that need to go? And I think once you just sort of do that, it's just a matter of putting it all in. And again, the challenge is often that we need to put it in a place that's interesting. So yeah, I'm sort of hitting the point here where I need to go look at some sort of line reference to really sort of figure it out. And I think that's probably what we'll do. So I'm just going to quickly sort of do a quick Google just so I've got some stuff up there. Again, I'm just literally just Googling like lion anatomy. And that's all. So yeah, nothing too fancy. But it is interesting because, it does feel to a certain degree that, yeah, the lions and the tigers they're a little bit different, right? Yeah, a tiny bit different. Just a bit, yeah, a bit different in the anatomy. All right. Just rearranging stuff on the screen. Because even I've got 3 screens on this machine, but still it feels like, yeah, you kind of easily run out of room. All right. So again, we've got now this doesn't have to be, you know, like 100% anatomically accurate, right? It is kind of like a fantasy sort of cartoon line. We're going to have sort of nose there. Let me get just shifting stuff around so I can actually sort of see it. And then we're going to have the sort of epic mane. So yeah, I think like the staunchness is like really epic on these lines. So again, it's like, will we see the eyes? Those are the kind of questions we need to kind of think about, because there's no point in, you know, having the wrong angle if we're not going to be able to see the things that we need to see. So again, that's the first goal, right? Is to kind of be like, well, what are we going to see? Does this work, right? Like, does this actually kind of function? Because yeah, in the last one, I really kind of played up that cheekbone, but yeah, I don't know whether lions actually have giant cheekbones. And obviously be these, and that's where the ears go. So again, I'm not 100% drawing through here. I'm not necessarily doing this in the best way. Just kind of playing around, because I think it's a 2-dimensional problem just as much as it is a 3-dimensional problem. And again, we want to sort of make those shapes interesting. But here we're going to have, again, that kind of mane come up here. And some of it here. So that's sort of where, right, like where it would be. That's where the ear is. And then I guess we've sort of got, how do we design it so it's you know, more interesting? Because I definitely don't want to just draw, you know, like a standard lion character, right? We need to, you know, add some attitude and style to the mane and these things. Otherwise, again, it'll just look weird. Okay. So yeah, again, I feel like, you know, that's kind of working. Not sure what the ears actually look like from behind. Because again, good to have them stick up to a certain degree. So again, not looking at real lion ear anatomy. I'm just kind of trying to create some interesting kind of overlap. Yeah. All right. So again, I feel like that sort of does a bit of the job, but I feel like we'll have to kind of revisit it. Yeah, I feel like we probably need a simpler. Right. I might need to really go in and sort of refine this and make sure it's working properly. And again, that's the good thing about this type of process, right? Is we can do that. But yeah, I might need to kind of go in and really work the anatomy there and make sure that's working. Figure out those muscles. So you can see here that again, I think the legs sort of really can start quite back. Again, I feel like we often, certainly I often imagine that like these animals are wider than they are, but you know, they're really not going to be that wide at the back. You know, like quite skinny, you know, from side to side. All right, so sort of got the tail and like the back of the legs. And that's something that, again, like I didn't really do a good job of on that first image. You can see the line is like anatomically, not like a lion. It's more like an elephant or something. But again, no one really seems to care. I'm sure people who know their anatomy are kind of like looking at it and laughing, because a lot of artists really do know all of those quadruped anatomical bits and pieces. But yeah, I know a very, very small amount of that stuff relative. So yeah, but I mean, in most cases, if you get the iconography right for something like that, people are just going to be able to buy into it and just go, yep, cool. I mean, it's got all the iconic signals of being a lion, so I guess we'll just kind of go along with that. And again, it'll probably look a little bit wrong, but that's okay. It's sort of cartoony, so we can get away with that. But obviously, the more you act with a character, right, the more we play around with it and experiment, the more important it's going to be to nail it, right? Because again, if I don't understand the anatomy that well, then it becomes quite challenging to move the character properly. So again, it's a mix of all of those things, really. And again, I feel like this lion tail is kind of really chunky. I don't think it would be this chunky. All right, just move that a little bit in. Pull that in. Right. Pull that in there. Again, just feels a little bit more lithe now. Yeah, so again, I feel like we're right like these. We need to figure out exactly what's happening. If in doubt, just kind of make it roughly the right size, the right shape. But yeah, I'll probably have to go back in there and actually kind of look at it. So I think basically, the stomach is going to sort of come up, right? And we're probably not going to have that there from an anatomical point of view. But I think this, right, is like a lot sort of chunkier. Or at least I'm just playing around. So again, we only have to do one of these. So you only have to kind of draw it right from one angle. But this might be another sort of case where, again, it really is going to help to kind of go through and, figure out exactly what's sort of going on. And again, it can be really useful just to kind of do some cross-sectional work that has nothing to do with anatomy, but it kind of tells us like what's happening with the form, so that when again, that just kind of helps us if we sort of need to render it. Although again, as I said, I'm not going to render it really. Again, that's going to sort of come down here, and I think one of the major things we sort of have to understand is just when I'm looking at these animals, I always kind of, because we always sort of see them from 3/4, and you kind of always imagine, like, if you look, or you're looking from the side, right from the side, these are really kind of chunky legs, but if you look at them front on, they're quite narrow. So again, same sort of thing here, right? We're really sort of coming along there, something like that. Again, I'm sure there's some people laughing at my attempt to kind of get this line anatomy working. Again, I feel it might be something more like that. But this is honestly how I do it. I'm just kind of messing around, you know, going from one drawing to the next, like one part of the image, and just kind of like fiddling around with it, seeing what happens. You know, I think often that the danger is that, you know, what I'm sort of doing is like just sort of redrawing, and I'm sort of experimenting, and that can be very time consuming. So it's always a matter of, you know, look, if we just kind of tweak this around, will that help? You know, like can we, right? Can we figure out what's going on just by kind of fussing around with it a bit? Will that help? Or do we really need to go there and crack open the anatomy book and sort of figure it all out? I think that is one of those sort of constant battles. So again, here I feel like I'm really going to need to define that space a little bit more. Because yeah, I don't want it to be 100% flat there, because you can see again that doesn't make sense from an anatomical point of view and a movement point of view. So that's coming down there, right? It's going to be like that. Yeah. Anyway, that's pretty close. And again, we're sort of at the end of this session, so we'll probably have to leave it there regardless, which is probably a good place to leave it. This is the point at which I'd be sort of saying, I need a break. I need to sort of get some fresh eyes on this. I'll probably come back, right? We'll probably flip it and go, you know, oh no, that looks terrible. Like I can sort of see that this girl's face here is like not gonna sort of be working. So again, we sort of flip it. I feel like the lion actually works okay flipped. I think that's kind of okay. Not sure about that character's face. I feel like that we could either need to make that a bit smaller. Or something. Anyway, that's the kind of thing where, you know, you can, I can certainly fiddle around with it for ages, or probably, you know, if I come back to it in the right frame of mind, we'll just, you know, look at it for 5 seconds and nail the problem. So that's probably the best thing to do, is just kind of come back to it a bit later. But I think it could just be, you know, it's like we're sort of looking down a bit at her face, but as I said, like we're meant to sort of be looking up at everything. It could be that. It could just be sort of the lack of structure in the face. It could be the size of the head relative to the face. So again, all those things are possibilities that we might sort of try. Yeah, so it does feel like that, right? Just like the size and position of the head is like a bit off versus what I want. Again, just relative to this character and that character, right? You know, it might be okay. And obviously, let's merge that down. What have we got here? Yeah. Merge. So again, I feel like this is where probably the easiest thing to do would just be to do a complete redraw. That would probably solve all of these problems. Or we could maybe try a slightly smaller brush, although as I sort of said, I really would try and avoid doing that because it means I'm kind of dealing with detail that I probably shouldn't be dealing with. So Lewis was saying, what's the brush size? So at the moment, this is like it's a 15 pixel brush size, and again, this canvas is kind of huge. I think I'll end up sort of doing the final inking with a brush size that's kind of more like sort of 8 pixels or something. So the final lines will be a lot different to this. But yeah, again, could just need a few more passes to really sort of define that kind of line quality that we need for this character. Who knows? Anyway, so we'll leave it there. We'll kind of end this stream and we'll come back. I think the plan is on Tuesday at the same time, so about 1 until 3 p.m. Adelaide Australian time. So catch you all then. Let me know if you guys have got questions. Get them ready for the next stream. And probably looks like, yeah, this is going to take a little bit longer to kind of finish. So again, that might be something where, you know, I just kind of work on it a little bit, you know, in between, you know, sort of polish off some of those things. A lot of it's just pretty mundane, you know, drawing stuff in the background. So yeah, we'll be able to figure that out and get it all sorted at some point. So yeah, we'll catch you guys soon, and hopefully everyone would be back at school at CDW at some point.